I'm Dr. Akanksha Mehta. My pronouns are she, her. I'm affiliated with Goldsmiths University of London, where I work as a lecturer in gender, race, and cultural studies, and also co-direct the Center for Feminist Research. My work looks at feminist and queer mobilizations in different ways. One of the main things I focus on is violence and thinking about how we might theorize violence through feminist, queer, crip, disability, and anti-caste perspectives in the world. Under that, my projects have mainly been about looking at right-wing violence, particularly by women's organizations. But also I'm very interested in knowledge production, and a lot of my pedagogical as well as research work focuses on the politics of knowledge production, particularly looking at gender, sexuality, race, caste, class, and disability. So that is what the main focus of my work is. And my work is also orientated towards activists and grassroots organizing. So I would like to think that the work I do is intimately connected to movements, not simply to theorization. It is important to me to be involved in this project precisely because of its transnational global focus. I feel like for a long time, researchers and activists have been carrying out various forms of research and mobilization against right-wing politics, but in very narrow local contexts often, missing out the larger global transnational connections that actually make the right wing the dangerous entity that it is. So for me, one of the big draws to this project is the transnational global focus. The other big draw, of course, is the nature of the work itself. My own research has focused a lot on right-wing women's mobilizations and gender, sexuality, the politics of reproduction, the politics of demographics, the politics of wombs has been a big part of these projects that I have been working on. So the Reproductive Righteousness Project allows us to come together as academics, as activists, to bring some of these works together and to think about what it might mean for us as feminist researchers, for us as feminist academics, to do transnational global feminist collaborative work on challenging the right wing through different frameworks. One of the examples that I want to focus on and speak about is the Hindu right-wing movement in India. The Hindu right-wing movement is a nationalist movement of upper caste supremacy and anti-Islamic, anti-Christian supremacy that is very, very powerful in India at the moment and has been for a while. At the core of the movement, since its very foundation in colonial India, gender, sexuality, and the control of women's bodies, the control of reproduction has been absolutely vital. So one of the things that has been happening in the last decade or so is that Muslim men in India are being framed more and more as threats and deviants, which is part of the foundational discourse of the right wing as well. But this has become increasingly common and increasingly mainstreamed in society in India, as well as legislation in India, where Muslim men are continuously seen as sexual threats and sexual deviants who are inherently attacking reproductive rights of Hindu women. So the idea that Muslim men are using vulnerable Hindu women and luring them into Islam through the use of reproduction, through the use of love, sex, desire, marriage, has become one of the focuses of the movement. So this is one example where I see how a right-wing project that is also in parliamentary power, with the prime minister belonging to a political party that is affiliated to this project, using reproductive politics and using narratives about reproduction, fears and anxieties about reproduction, to create panic, to create legislation, to create an environment of complete hostility and violence towards citizens of the country who belong to a different faith. And this obviously connects to a sort of global articulation of the Muslim man as a threat. So this is an example for me that shows how important understanding reproductive righteousness right now is, and how important it is to understand how states have been using reproduction, the control of particular bodies, the panics, narratives, discourses around reproduction and its connection to, say, love, sex, desire, marriage for a long, long time, and how intensified this has become. I would think of reproductive righteousness as the many, many ways, transnational, global ways, in which right-wing leaders, liberal political parties as well, states, other forms of, civil society organizations have come together in very various entanglements to talk about, to control, to have perpetuate discourses, to intervene in policy and law, to unleash different forms of violence, all of which is centered around families, reproduction, gender, sexuality, the control of reproductive bodies, the control of reproductive policies. So we see that happening in different ways across the world, where authoritarian regimes are increasingly using reproductive fears, anxieties, policies around reproduction, as well as policies around anti-genderism, as one might call it, at the core of their organizing, at the core of drawing in people into movements, at the core of making different kinds of political changes, at the core of the violence that is going on. So we see that in so many contexts. I gave the example of how this is unfolding in India and how it has been unfolding in India for a long period now and has intensified through particular narratives. We see how it's unfolding in Trump's America, for example, or even a post-Trump America. We see how this has been unfolding in different contexts where increasingly anti-gender sentiment, including anti-gender knowledge production sentiment, for example, disciplines of gender studies, critical race theories being attacked in the context of India, disciplines that study oppressed caste resistance, solidarity being attacked. So we see how all of this is coming together through a politics of reproduction. And for me, that is the Reproductive Righteousness Project, to understand these connections and to understand how reproduction has become the center of various authoritarian right-wing regimes, and to understand the continuities of liberal state politics as well as right-wing fascist authoritarian regimes centered around issues of reproduction. So one of the things I want to say, and I think the Reproductive Righteousness Project is doing really well, is to ensure that this does not become an academic project solely, and that the work of grassroots activists, organizers who have been working, fighting against state violence, fighting against authoritarianism and right-wing movements, particularly around gender, sexuality, reproductive rights. I think that this project is centering that as well. And that is really important, to create these spaces of dialogue between academics, activists, and activist academics. And the other thing I could say here is that my own work looks at transnational connections between women's politics in the Hindu right-wing project in India, as well as in Zionist settlers in Palestine, Israeli Zionist settlers in Palestine. And a lot of my work has looked at gender, sexuality, race, caste, and class, and the issue of reproduction has come up again and again. This project has provided a space to really go deeper into examining the reproductive politics side of this transnational connection that I'm exploring. My book project, which is called Right-Wing Sisterhood, is under contract with Oxford University Press and should be made to be shared with the world in the near future. And a lot of that project has also become influenced by the Reproductive Righteousness Project. So as I work on finalizing my manuscript, there are things that I'm learning from the Reproductive Righteousness Project that are being included in that book project as well.